The Blaze Radio Network. On demand.
You're listening to The Jackie Daily Show. Join us online, JackieDaily.com, on Facebook, and on Twitter at Jackie Daily Show. And on demand, this show and all shows on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Google Play Music, and the iHeartRadio app. I ran across a former member, or perhaps even current member, I'm not sure, of the Sierra Club, and also Friends of the River, who wrote a very interesting book that I wanted to tell you about. It's called Popular Deceptions, What They Haven't Told Us and How Much It's Going to Cost, by a man named Randall Hughes. And I know that Randall's overall thrust in this book is that society has been deceived. The deceptions are intentional, and in his mind, the greatest deceptions deal with energy and the environment. Now, you might think, well, that's a strange place for deceptions to really dominate the discussion. Why might that be? Now, I haven't asked Randall that, but I'll tell you, I'm a lawyer and technically more than anything a constitutional lawyer. I was on Capitol Hill for 7.5 years focusing on constitutional issues. And here's the deal. You know, there's no bigger power grab than energy and the environment, because it's one thing to regulate a state or a city. It's one thing to regulate healthcare or crime, which is certain acts or activities. When you're regulating the environment, you are claiming jurisdiction over the entire world, right? The only way you can solve a global problem, since we all share the same wind, drafts, and currents, and air and water, is to govern globally. It is the one issue of among all others that others can justify, some with good intentions, some with bad intentions, to try to take control over your life and to try to erode U.S. sovereignty, as you see up at the United Nations and around the world. So Mr. Hughes has agreed to join us, and we're just going to delve into some pieces of this book. And I thought it'd be fun to start off with some of the more colorful illustrations that he uses. So, Mr. Hughes, let's get started with this. You say that broccoli and bikinis can tell us about environmental threats. How is that?
Well, broccoli, for an example, is a known anti-cancer food. It's good for you, healthy. Whether you like the taste or not, it's something we're told to eat. But cancer also contains carcinogens, along with healthy things like corn and peas. So, there are statistics behind the words that were being given by the media, by environmentalists, and by others. So when I mention bikinis, I think in the book I suggest that statistics are like bikinis. What they reveal is intriguing, but what they hide is critical.
What they reveal is intriguing, and what they hide is critical. And now's a good time for me to point out that Randall is a real expert. He spent 30 years as an energy engineer focused on environmental compliance and long-term planning for our energy future. So you are a bona fide left-brained professional, an engineer, for crying out loud.
There you go.
And a man. So, of course, the bikini illustration, gets their attention very quickly. So you know something about things that are, when it comes to critical facts, things that are hidden and things that are exposed. You probably have reviewed your fair share of reports and studies. And, of course, it's all in the methodology, right? It's all in the details. What is some of the most egregious examples of deception, let's say through some high-profile study that the fringier parts of the green movement have pushed out?
Well, this may be slightly off the environmental, but it certainly deals with human health and the way humans are painted as evil. But it's the link between childhood vaccinations and autism. Mm-hmm. That link was first established in a study by Dr. Andrew Wakefield in the UK. It was done in 1998. And of course, the media, as they love to do, ran with this new proven threat to our health. They do it all the time. And it was, front page news, new threat. They keep repeating it. It's been in headlines for, on and off since 1998. And the result has been, parents are afraid to vaccinate their children, and we're seeing diseases that were once essentially eradicated coming back with a vengeance. Well, that study stood for 12 years, but in 2010, a rare event happened. A media reporter actually dove in to find the facts behind that study. And what he found is that study included only 12 children. 5 of those children had been pre-diagnosed with developmental problems. The good doctor changed timelines to give the appearance of a cause and effect. And even worse, 2 years before the study was released, he was hired by a law firm hoping to sue the vaccine industry. And 1 year before the release, he filed a patent for a competing vaccination. Mm-hmm. So, that's it.
That's a clear case of moneyed interests pushing out information in one direction, such as when I discuss on this show, petrostates like Russia or Saudi Arabia funding the anti-fracking movement in this country, when in fact they are petrostates and the frackers are their competitors. So there's a very common sense, rational reason why they might do something like that. So let me switch to another question you examine, which is, what can the history of beer tell us about global warming? How would you answer that?
Yeah, well, prior to the Little Ice Age, there was a recent period in Earth's history that was rather cold, ergo the Little Ice Age. But prior to that, wine was the popular adult beverage across all of Europe, including Northern Europe. When the Little Ice Age hit, it was impossible to grow grapes in Northern Europe, even in the UK, England. So the inhabitants that lived there turned to barley and malts and started making beer. Well, when they discovered America, when I say that, they grew barley and malts because they grow in colder climates, whereas grapes require warmer climates. Mm-hmm. Most of the immigrants that came to North America came from Northern Europe. They were hoping to escape the Little Ice Age. And, of course, when they came, they brought their traditions along with their taste for beer and growing barley and malt. So that's important for climate change and global warming, because recorded temperature history began at the precise time the Little Ice Age was coming to an end. And even the United Nations panel of climate scientists admit in their reports that recorded temperature history began during a cold period in Earth's history. Mm-hmm. So, the fact that it's warmer today shouldn't surprise us.
So now's a good time, Randall, for me to point out that you are a past member of the Sierra Club and the Friends of the River. So you're a person who has demonstrated concern about the environment. You have a history of being affiliated with what has now become one of the fringier parts of the green movement. I think these groups start out relatively mainstream. And then over time, move toward the more radical, they become radicalized over time. Institutions all change. Someone said to me not too long ago at a political convention, movements start out as movement, and then they turn into a business, and then they turn into a racket. I don't know. I don't follow the workings of Sierra Club and Friends of the River enough to critique where they are on that pathway. But certainly there's reason to be concerned about some of the things they're advocating for, which would harm the U.S. economy, among other things. Let's go to a break, and when we come back, we'll continue the conversation with Randall Hughes. And right now we're talking about his book, Popular Deceptions, What They Haven't Told Us and How Much It's Going to Cost. All right, we'll take a break. We'll be right back. You're listening to The Jackie Daily Show, and we're continuing the conversation with Randall Hughes, and he is the author of Popular Deceptions, what they haven't told us, and how much it's going to cost. And to be clear, Randall is a past member of the Sierra Club and Friends of the River. He spent 30 years as an energy engineer focused on environmental compliance. And by the way, there are a lot of those people in oil and gas. There's a huge number of America's scientists, whether it's chemists, geophysicists, petroleum engineers, who are in the industry. Sometimes the oil and gas industry, when it is up against the environmental movement or the fringier parts of it, is accused of being anti-science and not acknowledging science, whether it's, environmental concerns about energy production or global warming or whatever. In fact, the industry is a huge employer of America's scientific community and is buttressed by the work of many, many left-brained experts in the STEM fields. So, Randall, back to you. You're talking about, the things we're not told by the environmental movement because you think the biggest deceptions come from there, which is interesting. And I agree, because that's where the power to expand jurisdiction over the individual really is at its broadest. And so you speak specifically about solar and wind. And I don't really go out of my way to pick on solar and wind around here. It's really interesting because a lot of my friends in oil and gas are now talking about how the cost of solar and wind has come down and how, everything has changed. And we're now firmly moving into the solar and wind era as opposed to the fossil fuel era. I really don't believe that. I think the costs are badly underestimated and under-discussed. What would be your take?
Well, solar certainly has come down in cost, and I'll start with a brief true story. I graduated from essentially an all-engineering school in the late 70s, and I started in the electric utility industry. Well, all my college engineering buddies told me I'd soon be out of a job because solar energy was just 3 to 5 years away from being cost competitive.
Wait, and what year was that?
Late 70s, 79.
So in the late 70s, people who are focused on the energy sector told you, you're going to be out of a job, Mr. Fossil Fuel Utility Man, because solar is taking over in 3 to 5 years. Did I hear that correctly?
That's correct,
okay.
Yes. And, as an example of where the pricing is today, our utility, we're a small, nonprofit municipal utility in the Midwest. We buy energy off the market today for around $30 a megawatt hour. That's during the daylight hours. It's a little cheaper at night. We just recently signed a contract for solar power that is going to cost us a little over $80 a megawatt hour. And that's for a large-scale, utility-scale solar plant that is a lot cheaper to build than putting solar on your roofs. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, apparently solar is still just 3 to 5 years away from being cost competitive. Another issue with solar is if you're building solar in the northern half of the U.S., it's been estimated that it takes more energy to mine the materials, manufacture the panels, ship everything to the site, build the solar farm, than all the energy you're going to get out of that solar farm over its lifetime.
So wait a second. So it's going to take you more electrons to actually construct this farm, transport everything to this farm, not to mention the use of rare earth minerals, which are extremely toxic to human beings, to mine, and which make up the panel. You're saying you're going to get fewer electrons produced over the life of those panels than it takes to get them there in the first place.
Well, the energy to get there includes all the fossil fueled energy and all, like electric, gas, oil, whatever. But yes, you're consuming more energy than you'll be producing, which makes no sense from a sustainability standpoint.
No, and I will point out, I used to be involved in solar energy. Believe it or not, I did that before I moved to Texas, which is one reason why I'm not nearly so enthusiastic about it now as I was when I went into it. It taught me some hard lessons. A solar panel, in the state of Maine, just so everyone understands, is going to get about 40% of the electrons coming off of it that maybe you would get down in Death Valley. So some of the best sun on Earth, and by the way, sun is rated 1 to 7. Some of the best sun on Earth is in the Arizona over to Death Valley region. And the only place, this is what some of the top experts will say, you put wind in the wind belt and you put solar in the solar intensive areas. It doesn't make any sense for these liberal states like Massachusetts, Washington, and Maine, let's say, which has some of the, Massachusetts has always had some of the best incentives to deploy solar. It's just not making sense up there. It's just not. This is a really, really bad idea. And it's more of a religious belief on the part of the people who put these policies in than a reality that this is really going to pay off environmentally or otherwise for the people of Massachusetts. So I'm glad you made the point. You also point to wind energy and the fact that, the fringy part of the green movement will fight like crazy in court to and in the agencies to use the Endangered Species Act to stop energy production in a region, pretending they're wanting to protect some kind of a species no one's ever heard of. But they'll fight like mad to make sure that windmills can go in to kill, 1 million birds and bats every year. Am I correct about that stat? That's the one I've seen thrown around.
Yeah, that's correct. They fought for and won permits so that wind farms can kill endangered species. I mean, it's a double standard that, why are we allowing them to do that? Because we're in love with wind. One of the key questions or concerns, I think, with today's renewable technologies is reliability. And I like to relate that to the family car. If you have a family car that's fueled with fossil fuels, if that's your electric generating plant, you can expect to drive that car over 95% of the time. I say that because you can't drive it when it's in the shop for maintenance. But when you do drive, you can also drive as fast as you please or as fast as you're brave enough to go. You control the speed. If you have a wind or solar-powered car, you can expect to drive it about 50 to 75% of the time, but it's never your choice when you drive, and you can never control the speed. It's up to the wind and the sun. So, we would never accept that level of unreliability from our vehicles, but we love it and embrace it when it comes to renewable energy. Right.
And so you refer to that as the double standard quite appropriately. Okay, Randall, we've only got 2 minutes left in this segment. What is the single biggest deception you'd like to point out in your book, Popular Deceptions, that you think the public needs to know about?
Well, environmentally, I think it's air quality. For the last 40 years, we've increased fossil fuel use nearly 50%. And by 2007, the peak of coal usage, we'd nearly tripled the amount of coal we burned compared to 40 years ago, 1970. Well, asthma rates have increased dramatically over that time. We're told that that's a cause and effect relationship, and it makes all the sense in the world. It's easy to believe. But according to the EPA, today we're emitting 70% fewer pollutants, the criteria pollutants that are most related to human health, 70% fewer of those pollutants than we did in 1970.
Did you say 70% fewer? You're talking about what? Sulfur dioxide,
SO2, NOx.
Yep.
The big. I think
the
there's
VOCs.
6 criteria pollutants that they identify, and I think that's. I don't think anybody realizes that. The fact is, our air is cleaner today than it's been over most of our lifetimes. And I think it proves that, hey, guess what, guys? We can continue to burn fossil fuels and still clean the air.
Right, and not sacrifice, by the way, either population growth or economic growth. And I just helped out on an op-ed for Kathleen Hartnett-White, who will be confirmed to the White House Council on Environmental Quality soon, because she was presiding over the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality for years. And during her tenure, she saw exactly the same thing, which is that these particulates in the air were dramatically just plummeting over the period 2000 to 2006. For example, in the city of Houston, even though the population had grown about 20% and the GDP had boomed, there need not be a sacrifice environmentally to have population or economic growth, is what it showed us. And maybe even that almost like the more fossil fuels you're using, the cleaner your environment, which might sound counterintuitive, but the point can actually be made and proven. And to prove that to you, I recommend 2 books to you. The first one, the one we're discussing, is Popular Deceptions, What They Haven't Told Us and How Much It's Going to Cost by Randall Hughes. Also, I recommend Fueling Freedom by Kathleen Hartnett-White, who I just mentioned, formerly of the Texas Public Policy Foundation, and now in Washington and on her way up to being confirmed. So, Randall, very proud of your book. Thank you for sending it to me. There's so much to review here. You gave me page after page after page after page of things, and we're out of time. But I want to tell everyone where they can find your book. If they want to get a copy of this book, where do they go?
You can go to Amazon.com.
Okay.
And just plug in Popular Deceptions, and it'll be the first book that pops up.
Okay, very good. I recommend this to you all. It is a fun and entertaining read written by a former member of the Sierra Club and Friends of the River who spent over 30 years as an energy engineer focused on environmental compliance. He takes you through the deceptions in the energy and environment debate. This is someone who should know. Again, Randall Hughes. Randall, thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
You're listening to The Jackie Daly Show.